Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lisa McDuffie. I'm the President and CEO of the YWCA of Northwest Ohio, and it is truly a pleasure to welcome you to our second Lunch and Learn for this year. I'm delighted to share with you that the YWCA has been really working in this space to work toward the elimination of racism for 150 years. This year is actually our anniversary, and we are extremely excited at the work that we've been able to bring to the citizens of our community. We have heard your demands in terms of the education you are interested in, and today I think you'll be extremely pleased with our speaker. Before I get to introducing our speaker, let me give a shout out to Jan Ruma, our partner again in this series, who is in charge of Healthy Lucas County. Healthy Lucas County is a coalition of community organizations that work to improve the health of all Lucas County residents. We really work to especially focus our attention on addressing the needs of residents living in low-income areas and lessening health disparities that help everyone live to their fullest potential. Healthy Lucas County is governed by an executive committee of community leaders. And more information, we ask that you go to the healthylucascounty.org website. Just a couple of things that I want to review. If this is your first time joining us, please feel free to drop your name and your organization in the Q&A box so that we are able to, sorry about that, so that we are able to recognize who's here. The chat function has been disabled, but we do want to exercise the function of the Q&A. At any time, if there are questions or comments, feel free to drop them in that function, and we will be sure to get to them toward the end of our presentation. We also have a link to an evaluation that will be dropped in that function, and I ask that you take the time to complete it. We will get it in instant time. And again, it gives us an opportunity to know what it is you are looking for so that we can continue to strengthen your equity muscle as it relates to race equity. So without further delay, let me get right to our speaker. It is a pleasure and an honor to introduce Elijah Jones. He is a licensed independent social worker with supervisory designation. He is a licensed independent chemical dependency counselor. He is certified in diversity professional, and he has a master's degree in social work. He's currently working as a PhD candidate at the University of Toledo. He currently serves as the manager of treatment services with the Mental Health and Recovery Services Board of Lucas County. He manages contracts related to the treatment of mental health and substance use disorder, and he is committed to health equity and the strategy ways to develop a more culturally competent behavioral health workforce. It is my pleasure to introduce Elijah Jones and bring to you Black Stress Matters, Understanding and Responding to Toxic Stress Through Trauma-Informed Care. Mr. Jones, it's all yours.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for having me today. We're just going to jump right into the presentation. Feel free throughout this talk today to ask questions using the Q&A. I'm excited to be here today, and I'm excited about this topic. So you're here, Black Stress Matters. You might think, why Black stress? Don't all stress matters? And I think, so this is just a funny representation kind of in response to people who think, you know, all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter. So that the movement of Black lives really began in response to like police brutality and the victimization and deaths of Black individuals in this country. And that movement is so important, and it's great to see the continual work in our community to address the structural racism that perpetuates in law enforcement. But today I'm concerned with how we respond to Black individuals who come into our care, whether we're working in a school, whether we're working in medical, whether we're working in mental health or substance use disorder treatment. You know, there is associated stress with being Black that often goes unrecognized, and there's multiple factors that play into that. So that's why we entitled that today, also Black Stress Matters, because, you know, I just want to focus on, you know, how we can help individuals, you know, work through that stress and, you know, live happy, healthy lives. So our objectives today are pretty simple. I hope that at the end of this time, you'll be able to review some frameworks for understanding stress, define toxic stress, and it's important in understanding minority stress, and understand 3 ways to become more trauma-informed. So about me, I think it's important that you understand who I am, since when I'm leading this, but why, you know, I'm coming to this topic and why this is so important to me. So as Lisa said in my bio, you know, I have my bachelor's and master's degree in social work. I graduated from the University of Toledo, and I'm a PhD candidate in educational psychology at UT. So I have some credentials behind my name. I think that, you know, while I like credentials, I just recognize that it doesn't make me competent. It just shows that I can kind of work through some things and achieve something that some people might think is important. My work, I'm the manager of treatment services with the Mental Health and Recovery Services Board. I'm also the Region 1 director for the National Association of Social Workers Ohio chapter, and I currently am the co-chair with the Social Justice Subcommittee of the Human Relations Commission of Toledo. I really, you know, my values really revolve around wisdom and collaboration, competency, diverse perspectives, and justice. So those things I bring to this presentation today, and the theories I kind of use that are just from my training and education, and who I am as a person, you know, and what I bring today really revolve around like systems theory, critical race theory, the ecological model for human development, motivation theory, trauma-informed care, and anti-racism. So those are kind of the theories and frameworks I'm using today. We'll go into some of them very briefly. This is not kind of, this is not like a educational lecture. We're not going to talk about the history. I'm not really even going to cite things. Well, I think that's all important. I'm going to really focus on how we take theories and put them into action and what that means to our work with individuals. So we're going to start with the poll. And I'm going to launch that now. So it's a simple poll. You know, there's 3 answers, and we have some coming in. This is an anonymous poll, so if you feel funny about giving a certain answer, don't worry. No one's going to know, you know, whether it was you or not. And we'll give it a couple more seconds here. We have about 70% of the responses in. So, did you brush your teeth today? We're almost. Give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, and I'm going to share these results. So it looks like most of you did brush your teeth today. Congratulations. So a few haven't yet, and a few can't remember. I know I've had those days, and you know that I couldn't remember if I brushed my teeth or not. That's like the funniest feeling when, you know, when I did go to work now I'm working from home. But when I did actually go into the office, and I'd be in my car on my way, and I go, oh, did I brush my teeth? Oh, I don't remember. It feels like I did, but maybe not. So thanks for participating in that little poll. It's just, I want you to get you thinking about your teeth as an oral hygiene, because oral hygiene is so important to ourselves. But there's a TED Talk by Jay Smoot when he's talking about race and how he came to more enjoy the conversation. There's this dichotomy we often have with thinking about a person as good or bad, or as racist or not racist. And that kind of thinking really kind of paralyzes us in our journey to being better people. If we think that you're either good or bad, or racist or not racist, prejudiced or not prejudiced, it really thwarts any efforts for moving forward. So he really encourages people to not think about, talking about race as in if you have tonsils or not, but more so as oral hygiene, that it's not, it's not a fixed state whether you're racist or not. It's a journey for all of us, just like oral hygiene is, that we're always, brushing our teeth, flossing our teeth, using mouthwash, going to the dentist. That's all involved in oral hygiene, and it's ongoing. You don't brush your teeth once and be like, oh, I'm set for the next, decade. No, that would be thoroughly disgusting. Oral hygiene requires daily maintenance, oftentimes a day. So just like that, I want us to think about not ourselves as kind of these fixed states of whether I'm racist or not, but how am I moving towards being what we'll call anti-racist. So there is this idea that some people have, that being kind means you're not racist. And while that kind of feels good, and people want to be kind to other people, kindness isn't the equivalent to being anti-racist. Anti-racist is really, and we'll get more into this, but really working against racist systems. And I use the word systems interchangeably with institutions, knowing that a lot of people, there are people who are racist, but there are a lot of people who are not themselves racist, who wouldn't identify as racist, but can do racist things and can participate in a racist system, oftentimes unknowingly, and that perpetuates racism. But they can be kind people as well. They just happen to sometimes be racist. So understanding that kindness is not the equivalent to anti-racist, but that it's something we're all working towards, something similar to our own dental hygiene. It's kind of how we currently view people when we're working with them. And I'm doing this presentation as from a provider's perspective. So if you're working with someone who identifies as Black, she talked about breaking down her oppression, and we often look at people like that in what I'll refer to as silos. So, if you're a teacher, you might think of someone in terms of their grades or academic ability. If you are a doctor, you might look at someone in terms of their anatomical body and how they're functioning. If you're a psychologist, you might think of someone in terms of their mental health. And we kind of, focus on these silos without taking too much into account their an individual's entire being. just like, she was talking about, she breaks down her oppression as, being Black on certain days and being a woman on certain days. And there's certainly oppression with both of those, and being fat, another type of oppression, we could say. So we need to move away from this siloed thinking of individuals and really consider intersectionality for people. So intersectionality is just this idea that lots of people have different identities, that social identities, political identities, that they can have all at the same time. Sometimes they could be conflictual with each other or at odds with each other, but these different identities that people have really give us a fuller understanding of who someone is, and where they might experience areas or might be experiencing areas of repression. So, a Black man and a Black woman experience different types of oppression. A Black trans woman, a very different type of oppression than maybe just a Black woman or a white woman. So it's very important that we kind of look at all these areas of someone to understand kind of the fullness of a person's identity, and understanding their stress or oppression. So this is the matrix of oppression. I'll just put this in here so you can kind of see that there are privileged social groups in our society, and there are kind of targeted social groups that experience more stress or oppression just because of their identity with that group. Some of these identities are more visual than others. If I could see all of you, I wouldn't be able to tell maybe your religion. But someone may know your religion, and that could be a source of stress because of society's perceptions of that. So, we know that Jews and Muslims experience a lot of targeted violence, while Protestant Christians really are the privileged group, especially here in the United States. Gay and lesbian individuals experience more oppression than heterosexual people. So these areas of social identities, people can experience multiple areas, and again, they could be a black man could experience that oppression for being Black, but could be experiencing oppression or stress from identifying as gay, when a white man who identifies as gay would only experience that oppression because of their identity as being white, or identity as being gay, not as being white. So people carry all of this with them all the time. Obviously, it's not the amount of stress isn't experienced, continually all the time for every identity. It really depends on the context. So we understand people's intersectionality, and that is really the microsystem. So this is the ecological model of development that we've been using to understand how people develop in the context of their environment. So this is really important as well. So intersectionality shows us an individual and their social identities and how they can, conflict or coalesce or work together for someone. Well, and that really is the microsystem of that, understanding that microsystem, also understanding within that their immediate support system as well. And that for some can be stressful as well. But there's the meso and exosystem that are important to understand. And these are relationships that people experience with, institutions or people to varying degrees. So the mesosystem is more closely related to the microsystem. So the mesosystem could be, a school or work, while the exosystem can be an interaction with the meso system. So a good example for understanding this system is that a child, isn't working, but the stress that a parent brings home because of work interacts with their system. So while work may be stressful for the mom or dad, they bring that stress home, and that interacts with the child. So we see then that people, don't develop within a vacuum, and their stress isn't dependent on one system, but kind of the interactions for all these systems. So then there's the macro system, which we know is a larger system that includes, both culture and tradition, the politics of where you live. And then there's the chrono system, which is how this system changes over time. So very important, and we know that, we are experiencing, we've experienced a lot of change for people over the years. And I think, this pandemic really is showing some change in how we can relate and interact to people. So, these systems aren't perpetual, in that they don't change, but they change and interact with each other. And time is another factor we have to consider within the ecological model. So we understand people in the context of who they are with their social identities, but then we also understand people in the context of their environment. And this leads us to the minority stress model. So this model, I want to make it very simple for us to understand today. So we see that people are in an environment, and they bring to that environment their social identities, their minority status or minority identities, and this can cause stress. So, in the context of our talk today, we're specifically talking about Black people. So they have this minority status that is stressful because of society. But then there's other layers of stress, such as, ability status or disability status, age, because people deal with ageism, LGBTQ status. And there can be different degrees of identifying with that. So, that is some kind of moderating factor, but there is stress associated with that. So we know that life is stressful, period. But your minority status can add to that stress. And depending on the environment you're in, it can be greater or worse. So then we have these general stressors, and within this model, there's distal and proximal stress. So people can experience racism, but they can also experience, and that's stressful in of itself, but there's also distal stressors such as perceived racism, or the stress of going in an area and thinking that there is a chance to be an opportunity for discrimination or to be discriminated against. I get really concerned now with, police involvement, seeing we've seen so many and heard of so many murders of Black individual by the hands of police that, there is legitimate stress there is potential legitimate stress every time someone has interaction, a Black person has interaction with police, because we've seen this pattern behavior over and over. So there's stressors, there's general life stressors in the environment, but there's also stressors because of the minority status and identity people carry with them. So this is all mitigated by someone's resiliency, so their ability to cope or their social connections. But all of this really has to do with someone's quality of life and their health outcomes. We know that stress can have devastating effects on someone's health. And having chronic stress does really not help someone's quality of life. So it's important we kind of understand that, racism, prejudice, these kind of things are really types of stress, types of oppression that are affecting Black individuals, Black LGBTQ individuals, Black disabled individuals. So understanding that people, have these multiple identities going on at any given time, and they carry those identities with them. Depending on the context, they can, feel closer to one identity over another. And then we understand that these people don't exist in a vacuum, but that people exist in the context of their environment and the interactions they have with, their family, their friends, the community around them. And within this larger macro system that we've kind of talked about in the ecological model is institutionalized racism. Another term can be structural racism. But this is racism that is embedded in society. It's codified in institutions, oftentimes by law and practice. It has to do with differential access of goods, services, and opportunities of society based on race. Institutionalized racism is normative, and it really causes inaction in the face of need. So we see that there's social uprisings all over the country, and there are white people who sit back and do nothing because of institutionalized racism. It's become so commonplace that people can't see that it's racism. And part of that is because there's no identified perpetrator. There's no identified person who's doing the racist acts. It's just part of the system. So these levels of racism were really developed by, in an article by Dr. Kamara Jones. And if we look at institutionalized racism through a critical race theory lens, we understand that every institution we have in the United States was set up and is to help white people advance. So in the foundations of the institution, there is racism. So we look at higher education or educational systems, for example, whether it be primary or higher education, those institutions were set up to help white people learn and advance. So they're racist because of their foundation and how they're set up. So people are interacting in an institution with institutions, and people are perpetuating racism by not, working to dismantle the institution and make it more inclusive for all. There's personally mediated racism. So this is racism that has a perpetrator. This is racist acts. This can look like a lack of respect, scapegoating, dehumanizing an individual, but it's prejudice and discrimination based on race. We know racist people. I have done, was friends on Facebook with quite a few racists that I were really undercover until they started, posting stuff in the wake of the George Floyd death, and they are no longer my friends on Facebook because um, the personally mediated racist they're just specific acts that work on invalidating and dehumanizing people based on race. It's the most obvious. It's probably the most obvious type of racism. And then finally, there's internalized racism, which is the acceptance of members of the stigmatized race, of the negative messages about their own abilities and intrinsic worth. This can look like resignation and hopelessness. It can look like accepting whiteness. It can look like devaluing oneself, accepting one's own limitations or believing one has own limitations. It can be, perpetuated by family based on experience they've had. So this type of racism really is, all these types of racism are pervasive in society, and we have to understand each level in order so we can recognize it and work to dismantle it. This term I'm sure you're familiar with is microaggressions. So microaggressions are seemingly minute, often unconscious quoting instances of prejudice that collectively contribute to racism and the subordination of racialized individuals by dominant culture. If microaggressions is a term that makes, in my opinion, makes racism cute. It's so people can feel that they're not perpetuating racist institutions because it's a microaggression. We don't call it racism, so it's something else. But microaggressions, there's an article I recently read that calls microaggressions a form of trauma people experience. Microaggressions are often continual. It looks like, when people comment on your ability to speak English, it looks like, when people say, oh, you're well spoken. It looks like when people don't take the time to learn to pronounce your name or continually get it wrong after several attempts. I've seen people who will struggle trying to pronounce a name a couple times and then just give up and say, oh, I'll call you Q or something like that. And those, they seem pretty minute. They seem pretty insignificant in and of themselves, but they're really acts of racism. And we have to start calling and recognizing that these microaggressions are forms of racism. It's not things that, people do that shouldn't be challenged, but they're racist acts that need to be addressed. And then so microaggressions are really what people do towards someone. Moral injury is another term that I want people to become familiar with. But moral injury really is this, it's committing or witnessing morally problematic acts that can contradict one's own values. Activists often experience moral injury because of their continual witnessing of the dehumanizing of human lives. moral injury can occur after watching watching racial violence on Facebook. You know, I've seen, you know, after the death of George Floyd, I saw a lot of my well-meaning friends constantly share the video or the picture of the event. And, you know, I often had to stop and say, do I need to see this to know it was bad? Do I need to see this to know it was wrong? The answer is no. Why do we keep sharing it? It can be very traumatic for people. Moral injury, you know, is this constant witness of racist acts. And some people feel powerless to do anything about, or feel powerless to make significant impact to change the system. Moral injury leads to brown burnout. So brown burnout is this is a term that really refers to the significant feeling of burnout that Black and brown people experience because of the need to always serve multiple roles with people. So, you know, in an employment setting, a Black person not only has their role as the employee, but they also have to explain racism to white people. They also have to explain why something was a microaggression. And sometimes they have to argue with people to help them realize that, you know, their acts of racism are wrong and hurtful, and are actual acts of racism, not something that needs to just, you know, kind of be ignored and dealt with, or someone has to kind of, you know, grow a thicker skin to deal with. You know, the constant witnessing of racist acts in society leads to brown burnout. Can lead to brown burnout, where people are just tired. They're just tired of the constant work that has to go in to exist fully in society. So all of this can lead to toxic stress. I don't want people to leave here thinking that every Black person has toxic stress. That is not true. Toxic stress really is a term that we've learned from watching, you know, learning about children and their development. But toxic stress is the prolonged activation of stress response systems in the absence of protective relationships. I'm taking the liberty to apply toxic stress here to the constant acts of racism through microaggressions, through mediated personal racism, through moral injury and brown burnout, because some people do lack protective relationships. They do lack someone who they can confide in, who can you know, who they can vent to, who can be their support system, especially when the person they might have is impacted by the same microaggressions and perceived racism and actual racism and discrimination, and the moral injuries they're witnessing. So understanding a person, their intersectionalities, and we've really talked about race because we're talking about, you know, Black stress here, but there could be, remember, there could be stress associated with other identities as well. So, you know, identity of being LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, or transgender, or queer, being disabled, having a chronic illness, stress from unemployment, stress from even, stress from school, stress from work. Remember, oppression and stress is not siloed. An individual has, the stress of their identities, but also the stress of their environment. That in other cases may be tolerable stress or positive stress to help them move forward. But when we take it collectively, it's compounded stress, and that can be instances of toxic stress, especially when those people don't have protective relationships. So I think of it like in my mind as this rubber band ball. So there's layers of oppression, there's layers of stress, and there's toxic stress that just, can become so overwhelming that people often don't know what to do, don't know what to do, are trying their best to cope with the stress of society, maybe not doing it the best way. Could be why people, turn to drugs and alcohol to deal with the stress of society. I particularly like the concept of a rubber band ball because we start, which we'll see in a little bit, to get to this idea of resilience that we want to talk about within a trauma-informed care model. So, we understand people's identities, we understand them in the context of their environment. We understand that people have this compounded stress that they can bring with them when they come into your office, when they come through your doors, seeking help, seeking services. So they carry these ideas with them, will I be treated differently? Will there be people there that look like me? Do they support the police? Is someone going to call the police on me because they don't think I'm supposed to be here? How many times am I going to have to say my name? I personally get that a lot. I know people who've called me the wrong name for years, or have known me for years and randomly call me the long name. I'm not going to say that's racism for me, but that is annoying. So people come to you with all of this stress, all of this oppression that they're bringing with them, and it's compounded, it's additive. It's not like, today they're bringing their stress from being Black, today they're bringing their stress from being gay, today they're bringing their stress for being a woman. No, it's all together all the time. So what do we do about that? How do we help people who are probably stressed out, who are carrying the effects of prejudice and discrimination from society, but also the stress of their multiple identities? And one way to do this is through trauma-informed care. So a trauma-informed care approach has 6 guiding principles. These are safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, cultural, historical, and gender issues. So trauma-informed care is not a new concept. In Lucas County, we have a trauma-informed care coalition that meets monthly to learn and be better at applying a trauma-informed care philosophy in work, whether it's with mental health clients, whether it's in school, whether it's in law enforcement. But understanding that trauma-informed care is not a single set of approaches, but it's technique or checklist of sorts. It's more of a philosophy that you approach, and similar to the paradigm of race and racism and talking about that as good hygiene, you know, it is ongoing, and you learn and you grow and you get better at it. It's not something that you take a class in and now you're trauma informed. It's, you know, you constantly are learning and developing how you can practice these 6 principles with the people you work with. I think of trauma informed care as both an individual being trauma informed, but that in itself isn't enough. It has to go to the organization or institution a person works in to be truly trauma informed. So I think what trauma informed means to me, it's a viewing a person in the context of their environment and history. And this requires that then I have to learn more about a person. And not just the basics, you know, checklist of stuff we're trying to learn, but really learning about their history, really learning about their environment, you know, what's good about it, what's stressful about it. It also involves me understanding behavior in the context of history, so including trauma. So when we understand people's history and traumatic past, we need to be non-judgmental in that. And when people behave a certain way or what they're doing starts to make sense. You know, a person who's never had good relationships, who, you know, may have been abandoned, who may have had been in toxic relationships, may start to self-sabotage good relationships because they don't know how to be in a good relationship. And that's because of their history and the trauma they've experienced. So you might, a superficial glance at someone, you may say, why are you ruining this good relationship? And it may not be intentional. It may be a behavior because they're so used to their pattern of failed relationships. It also means being trauma informed means that I start where the person is and not transpose my goals on them. So as you see, I come with a certain education, understanding, and history. And I bring that to my work wherever I go. And my goals may not be someone else's goals, and I shouldn't be transposing my goals or forcing my ideals on someone I'm working with. So this requires that I set aside my own personal values and views of how I think the world and people should be. And that is, you know, what being trauma-informed and practicing trauma-informed care really means to me. When we're talking about, you know, people who don't look or act or sound like us, it requires multicultural competency. And this is a process of learning about and becoming allies with people from other cultures, thereby broadening our own understanding and ability to participate in a multicultural process. The key element to becoming more culturally competent is respect for the ways that others live and organize the world, and an openness to learn from them. So it's important that we understand multicultural competence is not this thing we achieve, but it's this work in progress like everything else, and that we don't view people as specimens that we're learning from, that we're coming along and learning with that person and becoming allies with that person, not and that starts to separate that power dynamic that we often experience with the provider-client relationship. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're probably familiar with this, but in my my mind when I approach people, we have to start with basic needs if I'm going to help them reach those other needs. So I think like in mental health, if I'm going to help someone's depression or anxiety, their physiological and safety needs need to be met first before I can really start addressing those. So how do I meet Black individuals where they are? In social work, we often say that meet a client where they are, but that's often easier said than done. We really have to understand a person where they are in order to meet them where they are, and that's part of a trauma-informed care model. It's recognizing that there needs to be some legwork to do, maybe that has to be done before you can actually do the work you're meant to do with a person. In the next couple slides, you'll see where I ask these questions, because I really want you to start to reflect on, how do I do this? Principle 6 really talked about the cultural trauma, historical trauma, and the gender lens. So we know there's cultural and historical trauma that people have faced, slavery, for example, of the Holocaust is another instance of trauma that people as a collective experience, not as an individual. So an individual does experience the trauma, but it's felt by, the group of people as well. So those are important to recognize when you're doing this trauma-informed work, because people they can bring their individual trauma with them, but they also bring that historical and cultural trauma they may have, the collective may have felt with them. I would go to say that, the violence with police we've seen against Black people is a type of cultural trauma. And then there's also the gender lens that we have to address. We can't ignore the differences in gender that we tend, when we ignore differences in gender, we tend on males because, focus on males because they're the dominant framework in society. Gender neutrality is always male-centered, so we have to attend to gender as a form when we're doing trauma-informed work, because we always go back to kind of a male-centric model. Just like when we're doing work in race, we have to be cognizant because our default setting in society is racism. So another principle in this is safety, and this is emphasized throughout the organization, staff and people they serve, where children or adults feel physically and psychologically safe. Interpersonal interactions are safe, and people are constantly promoting safety, and understanding that safety is defined not by the dominant culture, but by the people that are served. So how do I promote safety for the Black individuals I provide services for? Leave you to kind of reflect on that. One way I think to start making a more safe environment for Black individuals is to start to recognize your own implicit biases. And that's the first step, is recognizing that you have biases. And those are unconscious. They come from your upbringing, and you have them. It's not okay to keep them. We recognize that we have them, but we have to identify what those are, start looking at them and dissecting them, and which ones are we going to address first, and look for ways to common interest group that people are going to help support you in addressing those biases, then work on getting rid of them. And then be mindful of bias kickback. So it's a constant reminder, because the default setting is the bias. So it's constantly working on getting rid of that. And then if you're not cognizant of it, it could be kicked back, because again, that's the default. Just like racism in society is the default mode we have to constantly be working against it. Another thing an organization can do is hire and retain Black people in the workforce. So this is a quote from an article I read. Being in an all-white space for me is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable being the only brown person. So there's a business case for promoting diversity and inclusion, but ensuring that we have Black staff who are front and center for people to see, who are helping to make decisions for the organization, goes beyond dollars and cents and goes to safety for people. There is safety when you walk into a building and see people who look like you. Even if it's perceived safety and not like, real safety, I would argue that the perception of safety is almost as important as real safety. Another principle is trustworthiness and transparency. This involves building and maintaining trust with clients and family members. So how do I listen from the Black individuals that I provide services for? How do I listen to them? Listening is essential to communication. You know what good listening looks like. I'm sure this isn't the first time you've heard that listening is essential, but really listening to Black people to hear, what they're saying, hear how things are microaggressions, hear how you might be perpetuating a racist system by doing nothing. And then taking that and doing action with that. So building, that is how we build trust. It's not by saying, do you trust me, yes or no? It's by listening and then action, doing something with the information you have. Empowerment, voice, and choice. This is another very important concept, but it's throughout the organization. Individual strengths and experiences are recognized and built upon. There's that resiliency factor that we talked about earlier, the ability to bounce back, to recover and heal. But how do I promote resilience with the Black individuals I work with? One of the ways to do this is micro-affirmations. We focus on microaggressions, but micro-affirmations are those tiny acts of opening doors of opportunity, gestures of inclusions and caring, and graceful acts. Affirmations include the myriad details of fair, specific, timely, consistent, and clear feedback that help a person build on strength and correct weaknesses. So it's looking at the little things people do, recognizing people's strengths, affirming those strengths, and helping people correct those weaknesses. And this can't be a one and done thing. It has to be constant over time, where you are affirming whether an organization can affirm the Black individuals that work with them, but as providers, we can affirm the clients we're working with, recognizing those tiny wins, those little wins, to build on bigger ones. So in my mind, this is all about being anti-racist, and I can be anti-racist, but it's more important that the system I'm working in is anti-racist. That includes identifying racist policies and practices and procedures and replacing them with anti-racist work. It requires us to understand and own the racist ideas in which we have been socialized and the racist biases that these ideas have created within each of us, whether that is racism for white people or internalized racism for Black people sometimes. Anti-racism is a practice that people and institutions must continue to employ moment by moment to fight against the racist system. So again, it's not that we achieve this level that we can say, oh, I'm anti-racist, but it's the everyday actions that we do, the little steps forward we make that help us to become anti-racist. To do this work, we have to focus on creating brave spaces. This is ways to communicate in brave spaces. I don't want to go over all of these, but it's, owning our intentions and the impact of those. Sometimes we have to recognize that even by trying to be anti-racist, I can be racist at times, and that people should let me know, and I should work on correcting those. Recognizing and working with our own privileges, it involves actively listening. You've seen that lots of times, but we need to actively listen and challenge with care. That involves having a relationship with someone, not just randomly calling out racist acts, but having a relationship with that person and working with them, helping them understand that what they did was racist in order for them to move forward, and really giving ways that they can challenge themselves in moving forward and preventing further racist acts. So I leave you with this. I'm a couple minutes over, but we're all in our comfort zone, and that is status quo, what we're doing every day. But doing what we've always done is perpetuating systems that are rooted in racism. In order to address toxic stress, the stress Black people may feel because of all their identities and the environment we're in, we need to start addressing systems. And to begin to do that, to begin to address racist systems, we have to do things differently. Using the same ideas over and over, going back to male-centric ways, going back to what's worked before, is just perpetuating racism. We have to do things differently. So I leave you with the final question: what can I commit to be anti-racist and trauma-informed? Today, how can you start to do things differently that work at dismantling racism within yourself and within the institution you work for? So thank you for being here. Thank you for being present, for engaging, and for taking time out of your day to listen to this.
Thank you so very much, Elijah. As I sat here listening to you, I started thinking you had a little bit of something for the clinician, a little bit of something for just people of color, and also information for those individuals that are in corporate positions that have the ability to review policies and practices that really affect either a positive way of looking at things from a racial equity perspective, as well as trying to dismantle anything that possibly would be there to oppress. So I thank you on behalf of all of those identities of which I am able to move and work within. We do have a couple of questions for you. We have just a little bit of time left. One question I received is, can you expound upon the term Black Lives Matter and what people need to say to those who oppose the term?
That's a great question. And I think people so opposing the term in my mind is an act of racism. It's not a difference. I've seen a lot of people say, oh, well, we have different beliefs. Why can't we just, get along? But denying someone's humanity or denying them the freedom to believe that people can live in a world that isn't targeting them because of their race. People who think that Black Lives Matter is a non-issue, or that all lives matter, really that is perpetuating racism. I would say that's also personal racism, and we need white allies really need to challenge that. I personally, it's probably very clear at this point that I'm not a Black individual. So I don't want to speak for Black people on how to specifically do that, but in my experience that, you know, it has to be, Black people are tired of justifying why they have the right to exist in a peaceful world where they don't have to fear for their lives every day. It's time for white people to start challenging white people on their notions about race.
Mhm. I think that's a great response. And, I'll just jump in and share. The other day, a group of representatives from the Black community got together and had a press conference. And part of my opening remarks really centered around many, many statistics that exist today. Statistics that tip the scale in terms of infant mortality, and the color of the babies that are dying, maternal, and what's happening with mothers during delivery and during childbirth, and the fact that they're dying, chronic illnesses and diseases, and who's dying. Black people, Black people, Black people. Those are all startling statistics that are real. And when you couple that even with the current pandemic of COVID-19 and the disproportionality of deaths, Black people. When we start talking about statistics and who's in prison, who is stopped by police, who's being killed by police, those are statistics that matter. So when we start talking about Black Lives Matter, all of those statistics should be alarming. They should stop you in your tracks and make you realize that just as if any of those statistics would paint a picture for anyone else, it paints one very different for people of color. And if we believe that as humans, everyone deserves an opportunity to live, have a quality of life that is a part of the American dream, then we need to care about all people, and that would include Black people as well. So it's just a different way of looking at that to try to help stress that. But I totally think that was a great, great question. Looks like we have a couple of more. Couple of people giving you shout outs here. It says that was a great concluding question. Race was created with economics at the forefront of the economic gatekeeping continues, and to help hold it up. How do we balance that some gain more wealth? I think you're still on mute, Elijah.
Yeah, I saw that question. I've been thinking about that. I think that you know, you're right on there. And how do we balance it? And I would question that it's not a balance of whether some people deserve to be prosperous because they were born a certain race, but how do we make all institutions equitable? And that's the challenge. I think it starts with each one of us recognizing that, that we work in racist systems and that we have to be part of dismantling the racism. So it's addressing implicit biases within ourselves, addressing microaggressions that we have, but it then goes on to addressing the institutions that we work in society. So school, the banks, medical, it has to do with all of those because, just like our identities aren't and our development isn't in a vacuum, people are interacting with all these institutions all the time. So, we can't have one institution that's not racist and all the rest of them are racist. We have to work at, fixing all of them. At the same time. So, you know, to answer your specific question about balancing, I don't know, you know, how we get to balancing that some gain more wealth, because in my mind that is accepting that. It really, you know, and I don't want to get into, like, you know, the merits of reparation, but that could come into it. You know, how do we help people gain wealth when white people have, you know, had centuries of the ability to gain wealth, you know, and some people are starting from square one. So, you know, it's a big question that I'm not sure I can answer today.
Yeah, we certainly have work to do. I mean, there's lots of other root causes that are certainly needed to be eradicated in order to even think about some notion of having some sort of equal parallel to that. I would agree. We have time for just a couple more. There is a person who wants to have your contact information, and I'm sure that's okay. We will see that it gets put in the chat. Another question is, talk a little bit about the notion that you mentioned regarding good people and the paradigm of, because I'm a good person, I can't be racist.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we think of goodness as this fixed state, that I'm a good person, therefore I'm always a good person, without realizing that, you know, even good people do bad things. And so even good people can be racist. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, everyone is racist. I'm sure that we've all done things that have been racist, but that doesn't make us racist. It makes us participate in racism and perpetuate racist systems. So a good, you know, we have to stop viewing goodness as a fixed state, that's something immutable and perpetual, but that goodness, or being a good person, is a day by day, moment by moment process, that the decisions I make every day help me to be a good person, and that, you know, I can make poor decisions. That doesn't make me a bad person, that makes the decision poor. So, you know, a good person can do racist things, but that might not make them racist, unless they are willfully engaging in that racism, even when they're being challenged and called out for the racism. So just understanding that, you know, some identities are perpetual, but being good isn't one of those, I think, those things that's perpetual. You know, it is a moment by moment action. And so in becoming, you know, anti-racist, it's a moment by moment, decision by decision, where we are taking into account, you know, the voices of Black people, and the historical trauma and cultural trauma that people have experienced, into kind of making decisions, even small ones where we choose not to participate in kind of activities or cultural appropriation that could be considered racist.
Okay, that's one question. What advice would you give an individual who is experiencing multiple microaggressions in the workplace?
Yeah, that is a really good question. If, you know, there's kind of two things that can be done. Go to HR and talk about this. If the workplace is committed to having a fair, equitable environment that is being inclusive of everyone, then those microaggressions should be addressed. the kind of the story I shared about the article I read with the woman who said she did not feel comfortable in all white spaces. She talked about going through the halls of work and seeing the white leaders of the organization all the time and feeling stressed by it. In her body, she'd just walk down the hallway and feel tense because she never saw people who looked like her on the wall. And she talked with her supervisor about it, who just shrugged it off and didn't validate her opinions. And all she was looking for was someone to go, "Oh, I see what you're saying. That, yeah, I can see how that can be hurtful, how that can be stressful." And she chose, because of that interaction she had with her supervisor, she saw the lack of commitment to diversity and inclusion. So she said, "How can I continue working here when I'm not valued?" So she chose to leave. So, at the end of the day, we have to consider our own health and well-being, and microaggressions can result in a deterioration of our own mental wellness.
Well said, well said. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have you with us. I want to just share a little bit of information with you about the YWCA. Please feel free to visit our website, ywcanwl.org. There you will find, under the Racial Justice tab, resources that you can use either in your home life, in your workplace, or even as a parent with your children. There's a list of resources that are available to help you communicate with children about racism. There is also information that allows you to sign up for our book discussions. We meet. We also launched something called the 21-Day Racial Equity Social Justice Challenge. We've done that twice, and literally it is resources that we send you electronically for 21 days. We believe that the more you get into this space and exercise that equity muscle, the better off equipped you are to do some of the things that Elisha shared with you. So I encourage you to be prepared to sign up for that for the next session when we launch it again. We have had our Stand Against Racism conference. In fact, we just had it several weeks ago, but the next one is in April of 2021. So I encourage you to look forward to signing up for that. This past couple of months, we had Jane Elliott, who's the legendary expert in race and diversity training. And we also had the experience to hear from someone that's fairly new to our community, Dr. Barbara Love from Massachusetts, who was excellent. There has been a lot of talk around the community to try to bring her back. So we're gonna see what we can do for the next YWCA Stand Against Racism. In addition to all of that, the Lunch and Learns, as I mentioned earlier, is really something that came together not long after the incident with George Floyd, but also through conversation with Healthy Lucas County. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to chair the Health Equity Subcommittee under the guidance of Jan Ruma, and we are interested in providing these types of sessions for you once a month. At any time, if there's someone that knows a good speaker, or if you yourself are a good speaker, please contact me so that we can try to fit you in on the schedule. But really, this is a community forum that we are looking to, again, just be able to provide a morsel of information to help you in this journey. Dialogue to Change is the last thing I'm going to mention. The YWCA actually has race dialogue. So if you are interested in signing up for that, please again go to ywcanwl.org and we will try to plug you in. That concludes our time today. I wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving, and until next time, be safe. Thank you.